I am a great admirer of the Scots. I am quite friendly with the Welsh, especially one of them. I must confess to some sentiment about old Ireland, in spite of the ugly mask she tries to wear. But this is not their night. On this one night in the whole year, we are allowed to use a forgotten, almost a forbidden word. We are allowed to mention the name of our own country, to speak of ourselves as Englishmen, and we may even raise the slogan, St. George for Merry England. We must be careful, however. You see these microphones? They have been placed on our tables by the British Broadcasting Corporation. Think of the risk these eminent men are running. We can almost see them in our mind's eye, gathered together in that very expensive building with the questionable statues on its front. We can picture Sir John Reith, with the perspiration mantling on his lofty brow, with his hand on the control switch, wondering, as I utter every word, whether it will not be his duty to protect his innocent subscribers from some irreverent thing I might say about Mr. Gandhi, or about the Bolsheviks, or even about our peripatetic Prime Minister. But let me reassure him, I have much more serious topics to discuss. I have to speak to you about St. George and the dragon. I've been wondering what would happen if that legend were repeated under modern conditions. St. George would arrive in Cappadocia, accompanied not by a horse, but by a secretariat. He would be armed, not with a lance, but with several flexible formulas. He would, of course, be welcomed by the local branch of the League of Nations Union. He would propose a conference with the dragon, a round-table conference, no doubt. That would be more convenient for the dragon's tail. He would make a trade agreement with the dragon. He would lend the dragon a lot of money for the Cappadocian taxpayers. The maiden's release would be referred to Geneva, the dragon reserving all his rights meanwhile. Finally, St. George would be photographed with the dragon. Insert the maiden. There are a few things I will venture to mention about England. They are spoken in no invidious sense. Here it would hardly occur to anyone that the banks would close their doors against their depositors. Here no one questions the fairness of the courts of law and justice. Here no one thinks of persecuting a man on account of his religion or his race. Here everyone, except the criminals, looks on the policeman as the friend and servant of the public. Here we provide for poverty and misfortune with more compassion, in spite of all our burdens, than any other country. Here we can assert the rights of the citizen against the state, or criticize the government of the day, without failing in our duty to the crown or in our loyalty to the king. This ancient, mighty London, in which we are gathered, is still the financial center of the world. From the Admiralty building, half a mile away, orders can be sent to a fleet, which, though much smaller than it used to be, or than it ought to be, is still unsurpassed on the seas. More than 80% of the British casualties of the Great War were English. More than 80% of the taxation is paid by the English taxpayers. We are entitled to mention these facts and to draw authority and courage from them. Historians have noticed all down the centuries one peculiarity of the English people which has cost them dear. We have always thrown away after a victory the greater part of the advantages we had gained in the struggle. The worst difficulties from which we suffer do not come from without, they come from within. They do not come from the cottages of the wage earners. They come from a peculiar type of brainy people, always found in our country, who, if they add something to its culture, take much from its strength. Our difficulties come from the mood of unwarrantable self-abasement into which we have been cast by a powerful section of our own intellectuals. They come from the acceptance of defeatist doctrines by a large proportion of our politicians. But what have they to offer but a vague internationalism, a squalid materialism, and the promise of impossible utopias? Nothing can save England if she will not save herself. If we lose faith in ourselves, in our capacity to guide and govern, if we lose our will to live, then indeed our story is told. If, while on all sides foreign nations are every day asserting a more aggressive and militant nationalism by arms and trade, we remain paralyzed by our own theoretical doctrines or plunged into the stupor of after-war exhaustion, then indeed all that the croakers predict will come true, and our ruin will be swift and final. Stripped of her empire in the Orient, deprived of the sovereignty of the seas, loaded with debt and taxation, her commerce and carrying trade shut out by foreign tariffs and quotas, England would sink to the level of a fifth-rate power, and nothing would remain of all her glories except a population much larger than this island can support. Why should we break up the solid structure of British power, founded upon so much health, kindliness, and freedom, for dreams which may someday come true, but are now only dreams, and some of them nightmares? We ought as a nation and empire to weather any storm that blows, at least as well as any other existing system of human government. We are at once more experienced and more truly united than any people in the world. It may well be that the most glorious chapters of our history are yet to be written. Indeed, the very problems and dangers that encompass us and our country ought to make English men and women of this generation glad to be here at such a time. We ought to rejoice at the responsibilities with which destiny has honored us, and be proud that we are the guardians of our country in an age when her life is at stake. Churchill's broadcast of the 16th of November 1934, again from London, was another of those rare occasions during his wilderness years when the BBC authorities, exercising as they did a monopoly of the airwaves, heavily biased towards appeasement and ever fearful of broadcasting anything that might make Herr Hitler angry, allowed Churchill's lone voice airtime.
As we go to and fro in this peaceful country, with its decent, orderly people going about their business under free institutions, and with so much tolerance and fair play in their laws and customs, it is startling and fearful to realize that we are no longer safe in our island home. For nearly 1,000 years, England has never seen the campfire of an invader. The stormy seas and our Royal Navy have been our sure defense. Not only have we preserved our life and freedom through the centuries,